Thank you both for being here today, for doing this first episode of the podcast. This is a pilot. I want you to feel comfortable. Maybe start telling me a little about you. Who is Jacob? About who is Rogelio?
I'm Jacob Garza. I'm a professional engineer in Texas. I have 10 years of experience doing engineering, land development, construction work in Texas and South Texas.
I'm Rogelio Hernandez. I'm also a professional engineer here in the state of Texas. I have 10 years of experience in land development and construction. I'm the director of land development for Primera Land, and that's a little bit of who I am.
So I have these little questions, but the first one I have is, where are you now?
Right now, we're at the offices of Primera Land. We're actually in Edinburgh.
You have now mentioned twice Primera Land. We also know that we have Garza and Hernandez Engineering and GST Construction Inc. You can tell us a little about all of these three companies?
Yeah. Garza and Hernandez Engineering is a firm that specializes in land development. Primarily, we do land development in South Texas, and that is our bread and butter. We are able to do land development projects in other areas, projects or infrastructure and other types of municipal projects, but we're primarily specializing right now in land development. You want to talk a little bit about GST?
GST Construction has been around for about 18 years. It all started with Jacobo Garza, which is Jacob's dad. I recently joined about 3 years ago, and GST Construction focuses on construction horizontal, basically in subdivisions, commercial parking lots. We do utilities, which consist of sewer lines, water lines, storm lines. We also do parking lots, roads, flex base, pavement surfaces, concrete surfaces, and we have a team of subcontractors that help us do landscaping and irrigation, as well as electrical facilities to provide full service on parking lots.
So Primera Land is the culmination of everything as far as from the engineering and construction. We're primarily developers as well that take raw land, turn raw land into usable residential or commercial or multifamily purposes, really. And currently, most of our projects are multifamily residential, but we're not opposed to doing commercial as well.
What I would like to add there is that since we're engineers, professional engineers, and also contractors, the culmination of both experiences, it was the right path to become developers. It falls within my experience as a land developer, back then joining Primera Land and GST Construction and Garza Hernandez. My previous experience on the work, my career, it was in land developments, doing subdivisions, doing commercial subdivisions. It's just bringing all that experience into fruition with Primera Land. And same goes with Jacob. Jacob has plenty of experience on large, residential development.
So I've designed multiple master plan communities, really hundreds of residences. I've worked on large PUD developments, things of valued at multi-aspect projects that include commercial, residential, multifamily, industrial, and public sections, and valued at $1 billion or more. So I've got into work in quite a few variety of projects over the years, and it's all being brought together and tied in to what we do now.
We met at a university. We're both graduated from the same university, same year. So that's how Jacob and I met. Jacob, during college, had mentioned that his dad owned a construction company and that he had semi-trucks that could do hauling services. Whenever I started my career, I started in construction, working for a big general contractor that had a big job here in the valley. One day it came up that we needed some trucks, and we didn't have any local hauling services that were very reliable. So I called Jacob, and I remember you told me your dad did the services. So he gave me his dad's contact, and we became good friends, and we developed a relationship that slowly but surely, 10 years of experience that I've acquired and Jacob has acquired. During all this time, we've been working together every time we can. It all culminated about 2-3 years ago, whenever an opportunity presented itself to start working together as engineers. So we started with the engineering firm, and then I started helping also in the construction company. Then we started getting some construction projects together. It all culminated whenever we decided to put money together to purchase some land and start developing or beginning the process of developing a residential multifamily project.
I think that pretty much summarizes the entire experience. It's basically been an ongoing relationship for 15 years from knowing each other at the university, studying together, staying in touch even post graduation and being in contact. And then I think everything lining up with our goals and our experiences. I wouldn't say everything was perfect timing, but good timing, I would say in general for everything to fall into place.
Things align pretty well because Jacob has a lot of technical experience. That's how he developed his career. I have more on the management and maybe boots on the ground type of experience. Each partner's experience complemented each other, so I think that's how we make a very good team.
You have mentioned a couple of times Jacobo.
Yeah, so my father, he founded GST Construction approximately 18 years ago. He's been in construction for most of his life, maybe 35, 40 years of experience in construction. He's owned another firm, and he did construction even before 18 years ago, but it officially became a company 18 years ago. He is from Burgos, Tamaulipas, is the best place to get him started at, but he did move fairly young across a couple places and ended up finally here in the Frontera in Cabo, not too far from where we're at today. He came in his early 20s and got his residency, has been here in the McAllen area since his maybe mid to late 20s till now, working in construction. And his role is primarily with GST Construction, basically all operations, really. He is the one that inspects every project, is daily going out to verify work is being produced and done to the standard that we would like to have. Aside from that, he is also has quite a bit of knowledge that you don't get from design perspective, but from actually being in the field and
Having the experience.
having the experience of having to make changes or do things that are not necessarily normal cookie cutter examples that will be found in textbooks.
Why are we doing this today?
We want to communicate to, public, general public that, land development exists, that, some of the issues or help you become a land developer or that could help you develop your own land, some of the common mistakes, technical knowledge, developer can make better decisions and it costs less. I don't know if you have something to add.
Yeah. So I think that's the primary reason for the podcast. We also want to touch on topics like today's topic, on things that happen and we can prevent certain things from happening, as well as helping the community understand a little bit better on what it is exactly that we do and help future engineers, developers, and contractors, follow maybe not in our footsteps, but maybe tread their own path, or if they want, just so that they don't fall into easy, avoidable mistakes.
What kind of mistakes do you think you can help them prevent? Rogelio mentioned that you can help people start their developments. I just want to ask, you mentioned you're going to help people. So how are we trying to help these people?
I think we're going to have a variety of topics of how in personal experience we have learned or we have seen other people have failures or mistakes that have been costly, that have been timely and have produced delays, and they're easily avoidable if you plan correctly for them and if you account for them, right? So we'll share some of this knowledge with the public, and maybe they can partner up with us or come up to us and find ways to work together so that we can help them firsthand during these processes.
Maybe you can tell us a little about one of these problems that you mentioned are avoidable and pretty expensive for people.
Yeah, I think we have one topic today, which is flooding. We'll talk a little bit on regards to the flash flooding that happened along the Guadalupe River in the Kerrville area. Unfortunately, there's been deaths and there's a lot of missing people due to this rain event that nobody was seeing coming, right? Us as developers and as engineers look into these situations and try to make decisions to prevent loss of life and strategies. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think I may say we just want to take this topic with the most respect we can. We're not trying to make any profit of a tragedy that happened. We're just trying to provide information for future avoiding of these kind of situations, right?
Yes. I mean, this is a very serious topic to it, but it's also something that needs to be discussed in order for people to learn about it, and maybe that way people will be more alert whenever they come to situations like this, and loss of life and loss of property can be avoided in the future. Well, a flash flood is whenever, in simple, very simple terms, is whenever it rains a lot of water in a very short period of time, and it produces flooding that happens within, hours all the way up to minutes, right? Which is the situation that happened in Kerrville. And we'll discuss a little bit of what happened in Kerrville, which is an outstanding situation, something that doesn't happen very often. Do you want to talk about it, Jacob?
Yeah, so I'll add to flash flooding a little bit more is aside from rain, it can also be caused, by engineering failure, which, it could be a dam or a levee. You can have a massive wave of water come down and gather into a single point or a single region, and it's devastating. It's basically the equivalent of a tsunami or something very similar, where you have just a large amount of water being concentrated into a small area.
Which is kind of like the situation that happened in Kerrville at the Wada River.
Yeah.
In the 4th of July weekend, which is a holiday here in the United States, a lot of people go gather in the cabins along the Guadalupe River. So there was a lot of people in the area, and a big rainfall came in, fueled by the tropical storm. I think it was very, and you just got all the way over here with the storm, and it dropped a very significant amount of. I've heard that it was 12 inches within 3 hours, Jacob.
Yeah, there's varying accounts still on how much water fell and how quickly. Ultimately, I think the general consensus, though, is that this was what would be called a storm event, which means that there's a
Statistical
chance of approximately 0.1% of it happening in a given year, which means not very 1/1,000, basically. It doesn't mean that you will only get one event every 1,000 years, which is a common misconception that people often think, oh, it means that we won't have another one of these in 1,000 years. You could have another one of these events tomorrow. It's a statistical probability of that much rain falling in a certain region over a certain period of time. So
yeah, and then so we combine a lot of rain happening within a very short time of period, and then you combine that with the hill country, which is happening in the hill country in Texas. Kerrville has a lot of hills, which means that water falls into the hill, and the hills have a steep slope, right? And it starts falling and accumulating into creeks, and that's how you get this tremendous flash flood that happen, where all the water accumulating into creeks, and then they move fast into bigger streams, and then the streams become rivers, and before you know it, we have all this water coming in, and where the water rose from the normal levels of the stream at the Guadalupe River all the way to like 20, 25 feet within minutes, 16 minutes, I think that was the, and it's just a lot of water coming in very fast, and it's very hard to prepare in these types of situations.
Of course, not looking for blaming anyone on this, and of course, understanding that it is like a situation not as common as someone will expect. How can we prepare for this? Was there something you could do for avoiding all of this damage, all of this losing of lives?
I'd like to talk a little bit, and I'll go over a few different things here from a community standpoint, and I guess I'd like to address a little bit of the political standpoint that's been floating around. So from the engineering standpoint, in the US, we typically design everything on 100-year events so that at the very least, everyone is safe for things that are at that level generally. Now, that doesn't mean it's true for everything. Certain things are designed for 50-year events that are less critical. Certain things are designed to 10-year, which means that there's a 10% chance any given year you can have that happen. And then we do have critical infrastructure, which is typically designed to 500-year in in Texas as well. So what that means, critical infrastructure would be hospitals or things that are considered critical to
Safety.
maintain operation, basically. So what that means is that in this case where you had a 1,000-year storm, even if every precaution was made, it doesn't necessarily mean that any of this could have been prevented based on design regulations. Now, this is a whole different question, and this is not to put blame on anybody, but should we be designing for more than this in cases like this where flash floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, things that may have very high probability of loss of life.
Right. Just to give an example, in this particular location, maybe quite significant in terms of elevation.
Yeah, and it is because you saw they've been getting rain events for years and they've never had this issue, but they had a 1,000-year storm and suddenly they had 26 feet of water. There's a basic economic cost to doing these things, and there's a viability cost as well. So if you would like to be safe from a 1,000-year storm, you could say, well, just build your home 300 feet away from the river, and then you're safe from a 1,000-year storm. But then let's say you build your home at that line, and then the next year it rains and you have a 2,000-year storm. Your home will get swept away because you build it at 300 feet instead of 400 feet. Let's build it at 400. Well, then a 5,000-year storm comes and your home is gone, or a 10,000, or 100,000, or a 1,000,000-year storm. Some type of event can always happen that exceeds the level of safety that you're designing for. And so ultimately it becomes anything that you design on this planet ultimately has a risk of something happening to it. But where do you draw the line for economic purposes and for
Safety.
safety? Do you basically remove half the US from being built on, to stay really, really safe? The likelihood of getting flooded at the top of a mountain on Colorado may be very low. It doesn't mean that it could never happen, but it would be exceedingly low.
Just to be biblical.
Yeah, it would have to be a biblical event. But ultimately, that's the question here. The second one I wanted to talk about is that there wasn't any failures as far as infrastructure. There wasn't like a dam that broke. It wasn't some type of
levee,
something that was just designed. There was no poor design, I would say, that caused this. And we've taken a look at the maps, and it seems the floodway is not going through the middle of the camp. It's going around it. So, from an engineering perspective, it was not poorly designed, but should they have designed something a little bit better? Maybe. But again, it's all about economics versus use versus safety. All that has to be weighed on what are the probability of something like this happening and how catastrophic can that be.
And one other thing that I would like to add to it is I think there's been a couple of news outlets that have mentioned that 1 or 2 buildings from some of those camps have been in the process of being relocated. Because the other thing that happens is that FEMA maps, which are the regulating maps for flooding that establish where the 100-year flood line is, they change because, storm events have been getting more intense over the years. They change because
Urbanization,
yes. Somebody digs a big hole somewhere and becomes part of the drainage system of the area, or that changes the water flows, or I don't know, that there's many things that the way water flows and how the floodplain is determined. We don't know exactly what's been happening in the area.
Yeah, I think by all indications, it was just a really heavy storm. And I'm not sure from an engineering perspective, much can be done to have prevented this. From a community standpoint, if you're vulnerable or susceptible to this, I think they were on the right track. I think it was mentioned that they were looking for sirens at some point or obtaining other ways to try to notify people in the Kerrville. Doesn't have very good cell reception in that area. So even warnings through phones may not be reliable. The other thing that didn't help was the fact that this happened at 4 a.m. I don't know about you or about everyone on here, but at 4 a.m. I'm sleeping and I'm probably not going to hear an alert or a message at that time. So they've mentioned, obtaining sirens, and it was something that they had been planning for, but unfortunately their community is very, very small. They don't have large budgets like a city. Obviously, every community has needs that, may have exceeded the risk or the perceived risk that they felt this had at the time. Now, hindsight, obviously, if we all knew what's going to happen all the time, we could plan much better, but we don't.
Nobody has a crystal ball.
Yeah, nobody has that. And every community has to take these risks into account. What's the risk of this happening versus making a new road that is being used every single day. I'm not saying that was a decision they made, but those are decisions that impact daily lives. Like, who knows how many lives have been saved by paving a road that allowed people to get to a hospital that may have not had access to that. There could be thousands or millions of people impacted by something like that versus this, which could have helped save, who knows, maybe the sirens go off and everything that happens still happens. People wake up, they hear the sirens, they try to think, okay, what could possibly the siren before? They figure it out, they start gathering stuff. They don't realize how imminent this is, and by the time they pack their things, they get washed away. 20-30 minutes is not very, very long for you to wake up and try to pack the things that you need. And
there's a case of a family that they were trying to get away from their house, right? So the mom goes upstairs to wake up the kids and
start preparing, getting clothes, getting diapers, getting
essential that they need is to run away. And then by the time they were ready, the house was already flooded halfway through the waist. So they ended up having to stay at home and just climb into the second story or even the roofs to try to get away from the water.
Wow.
So it's a unique situation. It's a 1 in 1,000 year event, a statistical event, and it's just very unfortunate.
Yeah.
And our heart goes to the people that lost, life and have people missing.
I think the last misconception I'd like to talk about is the political aspect. I think there's been a lot of polarizing thoughts on
The matter.
simply because people want to blame each other. There's been cuts to FEMA and other programs, or there's coming cuts, there's people that have been fired, and there's more expected, and some of the blame has been put on that there was not enough. If they would have had more meteorologists looking at this, that it could have been possible to save more people. But I think initial reports show there was like 4 times the amount of staff or 4 more staff members than were required, like a 300-400% more than was needed for this event. And news went out on time, warnings were sent on time. So ultimately, those arguments have little to no bearing on the outcome. If they would have had twice as much funding, I think they would have done just the same amount that they did. The meteorologists did their job with the personnel they had, and there was nothing they could have done differently. The summary in here is that I don't think there's any blame really to go around. The only thing that may have had an impact is had they had sirens. That's the only thing that could have possibly helped. Again, it doesn't mean we're talking about 300 people that are either dead or missing at this point. And so I think having those sirens could have impacted some of those numbers. But again, that's not something that they predicted was going to happen. And so by engineering standards, by community standards, by political standards, I think this is just a simple tragedy. And it's unfortunate.
So you talk about this lady that she was almost ready for leaving, and is there any way for preventing this in the future? Is there any recommendation that you can do for people that can be affected by these kind of situations for the future?
I think ultimately, when you're either purchasing a home or when you're deciding to develop, you should be aware of what are the biggest risks to, if you're purchasing your home near the beach in Texas or Florida or anywhere that is prone to being hit by hurricanes, you should learn, what are precautions to take against hurricanes? How can you protect yourself from, wind loads on hurricanes are pretty well documented. They don't really, or at least, we've been pretty good about having like limits on what hurricanes can do. And so I think a lot of the newer homes are designed to withstand a lot of those loads. Understanding how your home was designed is critical. Hurricanes also give you time to leave a lot of times, unless you're, on an island. But a lot of times, you have days of warning that there's a hurricane coming, and I guess what you don't know is how bad it's going to be. But I think
In this particular case, where you're in the hill country and there's limited access to roads and such, your house is in the floodplain or may not be in the floodplain.
if you're in the low area inside the hill country, you should always be aware that this is a risk that can happen. You're near a river, near a bank. When it starts raining hard, you should take the precaution and leave. I mean, that would be what I would do if I was in that situation. If I lived near a river and it started raining very, very hard, I would ask myself, am I willing to risk my life or my family's life? And I think the answer should be no for everybody. Obviously, if it's just like a little light drizzle,
Depending on the storm, right? The storm may be hitting upstream from the river, and it just rains over there.
and you get a huge amount of water, wall of water that just comes down. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but those are just things that you need to be aware of. And when you buy a home, you need to be selective of where you purchase. And know having a waterfront property is desirable, but know that when you're waterfront property, you have that risk.
Is there any way that you would recommend for people to investigate all of this? Any specific organization they can reach, or maybe some kind of investigation they can do online?
I would say they could talk to an engineer. Talk to a professional engineer that specializes particularly in land development. I would say would be very aware of
Potential risks.
potential risks. It doesn't mean that we know everything, right? But, there's a lot of things that can happen that are not typical risks. And I'll give you an example. I was living in Austin and I was working, and right across maybe half a mile from where I was working, a tornado touched down and destroyed multiple buildings about a half mile from where I was. So Austin doesn't get tornadoes very, 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 very often. Extremely rare events. So that is not something that is, I think, designed for. It's kind of maybe like this flash flood. Most people are not designing homes to withstand tornadoes in Austin, because those are not very common, but they do happen. And that's unfortunate. And so that's what I'm saying, that engineers may not be able to prevent everything, because if we were to design every home to withstand tornadoes, hurricanes and flooding and earthquakes, because earthquakes don't really happen in our area either, we could design homes to be resistant to all those things, but then your home would cost $5 million, $8 million,
And they wouldn't look good.
yeah, for a 200,000 square foot, for a $200,000 home, you can either purchase your $200,000 home, or you can purchase your
Build a
bunker for $10 million that can withstand all elements and nuclear strikes and whatever it is that you want to, design to. But is it practical economic wise? Is it practical? Is it, or do you want to have a home that you can actually purchase and live in, and you'll be protected from general high risk things in your area? And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is economy versus safety and making those decisions. I think another quick topic that I'd like to mention just for our region is that flash floods are not very common where we are in the Rio Grande Valley. We have a different kind of flooding event, which is, just general floods that tend to stick around for a few days in low areas. And those tend to be more dangerous in other ways, like infection, like you get sewage coming up and out and into the area. People get sick. There's a lot of like damage, like to like sheetrock and the materials that are used to build in our region. They're bigger disasters in the sense of the economic impact.
They impact many more homes or many more.
Yeah, like they tend to impact a larger volume, just not critically. It's typically not, people are not being swept away from their homes. Homes are not floating down the road. That's the biggest concern in our area, is economic impact rather than flash floods, which are more of a catastrophic impact, which is immediate loss of life and high dollar impact, but to very few people generally.
And one thing that I would like to clarify is that flash floods can also happen here.
Yeah.
Typically, we get a flash flood, alert every once in a while on the cell phone, and that doesn't mean that there's going to be a big current coming in our area. It's more of it rains a lot, and then the water wants to find the lowest points, and those areas that have the lowest points are the most affected, and they're the ones that receive the flooding.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what these alerts are for, to notify the public that people in the low areas could be impacted or in danger, right? But it's not the same as what happened in the hill country, where suddenly you had a wall of water coming into and swept away your home. In this case, it's gradual
increase
in the water level, and that's how typically it is here. For the most part, there's probably specific areas like the arroyo and the river.
Yeah.
That could be a little bit different.
The floodway.
The flood in our community, these locations are considered flood.
Yeah.
And they are restricted. You're not supposed to be building any type of structures, whether temporary or permanent, in those locations.
No, it doesn't mean there can't be, for example, let's say a catastrophic engineering failure on one of the levees. That could lead to major catastrophic loss of life and flood damages and flood, very similar situation, or in part of the embankment failing along the floodway. They're really large embankments. People build their houses near them. If an embankment were to fail and the water would start escaping through there, you could have major catastrophic loss of life. And I think that's probably the most catastrophic type of event, which is an engineering failure on a dam or an embankment, particularly depending on the height. It's not gonna, very unlikely to cause major catastrophic loss of life, but if you're talking about a 20-foot or a 30-foot, or some of those dams that are a few hundred feet in height, holding back massive amounts of water, yeah, it's one of the most dangerous things that exists on this planet to people.
Well, maybe for trying to close this subject, you can tell me a little about, there might be people hearing this trying to invest on land development or trying to get in this kind of business, sorry. So a recommendation for them to avoid their future projects having these kind of issues?
Yeah, I think I can touch base a little bit on that, Jacob. I met a lot of people that buy properties that they just decided to go buy a piece of property, right? And they did not go through an engineer, or they did not consult an engineer for their opinion. And unfortunately, some of these people have purchased properties that are either on the flood, impact by floods or the floodplains. And once they want to start developing, they find out, in order for you to develop this property, you have to mitigate your property, and it costs an arm and a leg. And it's very unfortunate that they don't know. And so my recommendation is, if you're planning on buying a property, whether you want to put a house or you want to, develop a subdivision or invest, consult with an engineer. That the cost that cost an engineer to review it properly. Yeah, diligence is much less than the amount of money you have to spend if you have to mediate or having to do something to fix the property in order for it to be developable or for you to be able to put your house. So consult with an engineer to review the property, right?
And I think another big thing to talk about here is there's different reasons sometimes for why certain properties are in floodplain. Sometimes your property can be in floodplain and not be prone to flooding. And those types of situations, an engineer can help you turn land that may have little to no value today because of it to being valuable and developable into either residential, commercial, or whatever purpose that you need it for. And then there's properties sometimes that don't have floodplain that are floodable. And so it's important, if you're going to develop anything, you're always going to have an engineer that's going to do that process for you. But if you're going to purchase a property, even if it's not in floodplain, it's good to have an engineer look at it, because sometimes it's not in floodplain, but it does have flooding issues. It's good when you get an engineer that, is cautious and does their due diligence to help you select your future properties.
Yeah, and one thing that happens too is there's been some people that, they own a piece of property that is low, and then, oh, I'm just gonna start filling it up with dirt. Don't do that, because what's gonna end up happening, you end up impacting others. It could be your neighbors, it could be somebody further down the stream, and whenever that happens, you could be sued. I think the worst thing that could happen is you go to jail, and then still you have to mitigate your property, which could mean that you have to remove all the fill that you have placed on the hole. So don't just start filling up a hole or a big property that floods. Ask an engineer what can you do to do it, because it could have consequences not just to you but to other people around it. If all that water is gonna go somewhere else, basically.
Of course.
Don't be the guy that just starts filling up a piece of land and then everybody hates you because you impacted a neighborhood down the stream.
Okay.
I mean, to me, it's hope that everybody learns something new today, something that could be beneficial to, a resident of Texas or
Anywhere, really.
anywhere. Yeah.
It's as either a resident, a developer, or as an engineer, or fresh graduate,
Right.
whatever, or this whole series is gonna be dedicated to try to just help inform people. I think this was a kind of a rough topic to start off with, just because it's something very recent, but I think it's kind of what is triggering us to move towards this, to try to help inform people, and hopefully it helps at least one person, and that's what counts.